He crossed the threshold, without warning, without preparation. The thin line between life and death, between here and there, vanished. Carl Gustav Jung was not just a scholar. He didn't just study the human soul. He came face to face with it. But what he revealed after that experience was too personal, too strange, and too dangerous for the science of his time. In the final years of his life, Jung confessed. He had seen that world, the world that begins when this one ends. And he didn't just witness it. He passed through it. Their faces, he wrote, they were watching me. But what struck me the most, they recognized me. How was that possible? Who were they? And why did their gaze leave a scar on Jung's soul? When he never managed to heal? We're about to show you a forbidden chapter from Carl Jung's life. A chapter rarely quoted, because within it lies his most intimate encounter with the beyond. It was buried in the archives, encrypted like a confession. Jung never described it in scientific terms. He spoke as a man who had died and returned. This video is not for the faint of heart. It won't give you simple answers. It questions everything we believe about consciousness, the soul, and existence itself. But it is meant for those who have ever felt that something about them was never quite normal, as if they don't belong here, as if part of their soul lives on another level, in another dimension, and as if someone from there remembers them. In this video, you will discover what Jung experienced the moment his heart stopped beating, why he described it as more real than life itself, who it was that met him, and why they remembered him, and what happened to his soul afterward when he realized he had no right to stay. He wrote about this in private journals kept under lock and key. He never wanted these memories to become gossip. But we have gathered the fragments from his letters, journals, and cryptic interviews to reconstruct this lost confession. This is not a scientific analysis. This is a reconstruction of a personal experience that shatters the limits of logic. If you've ever felt that there is more beyond death, this video is for you. Don't look away. Jung once said, "I realized I had died, but they would not let me stay because something in me was still unfinished." Who were they? Why did they recognize him? And what did they want? The answer lies in Jung's deepest vision. And if you stay until the end, you will discover something they never teach in psychology lectures. You will see his true soul. It happened in 1944. Jung was 69 years old. He fell, broke his leg, and shortly after the surgery, he suffered a heart attack. Officially, he didn't die, but Jung believed otherwise. I left my body. I saw the earth from the outside. It looked small, bluish, and I was floating far away from it. There was no fear. There was release. At first, there was darkness, not pitch black, but emptiness, a complete silence in which, as Jung described, he felt like a drop of water falling into the ocean. He no longer felt like a body. He was something else. He described it as a sensation where everything he knew, his name, his age, profession, fears, and goals, vanished as if they had never existed. But something remained, the core, the essence, the soul. He was rising. He felt himself moving upward, but not physically. It was as if his consciousness was being pulled into a higher level of reality. There was light, warmth, and then space. I found myself in a stone temple. It had no roof. There was sky above, but it wasn't earth sky. It was breathing. It was alive. He recognized that temple, even though he had never been there in his physical life. It was a place he had always carried within him like a forgotten memory. He stepped closer. Figures stood at the entrance. Faceless, bodiless, but he knew it was them. They were watching. I didn't see them with my eyes. I felt their attention. Their consciousness touched mine, like wind brushes the skin. They didn't speak, but he heard their thoughts. And the most chilling, tender thought he heard was, "You came back." He didn't know who they were. Souls? Archetypes? Gods? Old companions from another life? I felt that we had already been together, that they knew me more deeply than I knew myself. It wasn't frightening, it was overwhelmingly real. but he could not enter the temple. He reached for it with all of his essence. He knew that this was home, that beyond those walls lay the answer to everything. But the entrance was closed, not because of a lock, but because of permission. They made it clear I wasn't allowed to stay. My work wasn't finished. I had to return, even though I didn't want to. He tried to resist. He tried to stay, but willpower was gone. He was no longer a personality, no longer a human with desires. He had become part of something greater, and that greater force had decided. His time hadn't come. His soul began pulling back. He felt the space slipping away, like being torn from the womb of the universe. He screamed in thought, but no one resisted, because it had to be. In the next second, he opened his eyes in a hospital bed. A nurse stood beside him. His heart was beating again, but he was no longer the same. No one understood what had happened. No one would have believed it, except for Jung himself, and perhaps those who had experienced the same. I knew one thing, I didn't make it up. It wasn't a dream. It was more real than my life. What was it? An emerging archetype? The collective unconscious? A real journey of the soul? Jung never gave an answer. He left us a question. But in his writings, we find the keys. And in the next act, you'll discover the shadows of the past he met in that dimension, and why they remembered him, even if he didn't remember them until that moment. After returning, Jung was silent. He didn't tell the doctors what he had seen. He said nothing in interviews. He simply said, I experienced something that cannot be explained. And now I know death is not the end. It is a return. But years later, he began to write. Quietly, for himself. In a red leather notebook he kept hidden from everyone. There, he tried to untangle the question that haunted him. Who were the ones who met him? I did not recognize them with my mind, but with something more ancient. Not memory, but soul. He said these beings were not human, and yet they were. He sensed in them experience, pain, compassion, and knowledge, as if each one of them had lived many times, and every one of their lives was connected to his own. Jung had spent his entire life working with the idea of archetypes, collective images that live within the unconscious mind. But what he saw there didn't fit his theory. They weren't symbols. They were consciousness, beings, real. One of them felt especially familiar. It had no face, but Jung knew. This one was tied to him more than the others. And then came the remembering, as if a light burst deep inside a memory he didn't even know he carried. He saw himself, young, but not in this life, wearing different clothes, living in another time, and he remembered a name no one had ever given him. It wasn't Swiss. It sounded ancient, like something from Egypt, Babylon, or Tibet. He never wrote it down. He feared that if he gave it form, it would lose its power. But with that name came the realization. He had been in that temple before. He had once been one of them. He had returned to the circle. They were not strangers. They were brothers, elders, or students. Or I was their student. But most of all, they had been waiting for him. They knew he would come, not in a body, not as Jung, but as a part of their circle. They told him, not in words, you went too deep. You forgot who you are. You became the one who seeks. But you were once the one who knew. And in that moment, Jung felt guilt, as if he had betrayed that circle, descending into the material world. And forgetting why he came, he wrote, in that state, I remembered everything. All the lives, all the roles, all the mistakes. It wasn't information, it was knowledge, pure clarity. I realized I am not merely a psychiatrist. I am a guide. And in this life, I got distracted again. I became obsessed with form, with science, with discoveries, but I forgot the meaning. Who were those beings? His mentors from past incarnations? The ones he made a soul contract with before birth? Or fragments of himself left behind in other dimensions? Jung never gave an answer. He simply wrote this. They remembered me, but I not yet. It was only after this experience that Jung began to speak of individuation, the process of merging the personality with the deeper self. He understood his work was never about consciousness. It was about coming home. Man is a journey, and everything we do is a path back to the place where we are awaited, where we are remembered. His psychology changed. It became more spiritual, more mythic. He no longer feared speaking of the soul, death, or immortality. He began to say that archetypes are alive, and that a human is not a personality, but a player in a multidimensional game. We return again and again to remember, to reunite, to complete. And this was not just a near-death experience. It was a soul memory flare, a remembrance stored not in the brain, but in what he called the energetic body. In the next act, Jung begins to see signs all around him. His life starts to change. He accepts his true role and tries to pass on what he's learned, but not with words, with vibration. That's what he wrote about in his final unpublished letter. After his return, everything changed. Jung kept living, right? Meeting people. But as he himself said, life no longer felt real. I no longer felt like Jung. I was a temporary reflection. I knew that my personality was only a shell. And the essence was watching from afar. He became more attentive. Every meeting, every event, he began to see as a sign, a piece of a script written long before birth. Every person who came into my life carried a key to remembering, to understanding, to returning. He began to feel that the world wasn't outside. It was within, and the outer world was merely a mirror, reflecting what the soul already knew. And then Jung began working on the Red Book. It wasn't a scientific work. It was an attempt to translate energy into symbols, to describe, not with words, but with color, image, and vibration, what could never be explained through logic. Every page of the book is a portal, a spell through which he tried to transmit what we have forgotten, who we once were, and why we are here. He stopped looking for proof. He understood proof is for the mind. Truth comes through vibration. When the soul meets truth, it needs no explanation. It simply remembers. He gave fewer interviews, wrote less in academic language, and more he watched. But it hurt. It hurt that he could not say everything. That language was too coarse, that most people were still asleep, and that if he told the truth, they would call him mad. He tried to be a bridge between science and spirit, between form and essence. And it was the hardest mission of all. It is easier for man to believe in illness than in the soul, easier to accept suffering than immortality, because immortality demands responsibility. In one of his final letters, he wrote, "I can no longer divide the world into psyche and matter. They are the same. The world is a reflection of the inner self, and everything we see is part of a grand psychodrama." And then he began to hear the inner call, the same voice that spoke to him in the temple. It came in dreams, in intuition, in strange coincidences. Jung felt his time was drawing near, but now he was no longer afraid. He waited. Now I know where I'm going, and I know they remember me there. He said that some souls come into this world with a mission to awaken others, but awakening does not come through words. It comes through energy. When you remember who you are, you change your vibration, and those around you begin to change, not because you teach them, but because you become a mirror. This, he said, is the nature of synchronicity, that everything in life is a response to your inner state. Kendall, his final thought, according to one of his students, was this: "They did not forget me, and I'm finally starting to remember them." But with that revelation comes a cost. Jung warned, once you remember, you can no longer live as before. The old life collapses because you are no longer asleep. You begin to see signs, feel other people's pain, understand the meaninglessness of chasing status, and hear a call that's always been inside you. He did not leave us a formula. He left a vibration, and those who are ready will hear it. The message, if you have ever felt that you are not just this body, that you've been here before, that someone is watching you from the other side and remembers you, then maybe you're beginning to remember too. Jung crossed the threshold. He did not return with an answer, but with a question that now echoes within us. Who were you before you forgot yourself?